Welcome back. My name is Chris, and in this video, we're going to be reviewing Shepard's CMMS product for NetSuite. Now, if you don't know what a CMMS is, it stands for Computerized Maintenance Management System. It's basically a system that allows you to keep track of assets and the various pieces and types of maintenance that you have to do on them. So Shepard is a company that actually makes many different types of products, and I'll comment on several of them in this video, but we're going to specifically be focusing on CMMS here. And to start off, it's important, I think, to understand the difference between CMMS and something like field service management, which you may have heard about, also known as FSM. So the key difference is that CMMS is for assets that we own as the company, and the example I'm going to use as we go through this video is that we are a large construction company, so we do these construction projects and we have massive pieces of equipment like tractors, excavators, and they go out and they are owned by us, and we want to make sure that they're well maintained so they don't break down. So the CMMS product will help us do that, as opposed to a field service management where, let's say, if you're repairing HVAC equipment, like air conditioners, that are owned by school campuses, well, if you're sending your technicians out to the campus, it's their asset, you're maintaining it. That's an FSM. There's even a third variant, which is kind of a mixture of the first two, where you can have rental. So for example, we own tractors, but we also sometimes rent out tractors to other construction companies. So you might have a CMMS with a rental aspect. So that's kind of how things break out. And actually, Shepard has products for each one of these categories and more. But again, we're going to mainly be focusing on CMMS in this particular video. Now, from a NetSuite standpoint, when it comes to field service management, NetSuite does have a native FSM product called FSM, but it does not have any CMMS capabilities. You simply cannot do that function in NetSuite as it currently stands. So for companies that do have a CMMS requirement, they have to rely on third-party applications. And there are a handful. You have things like Fix, Limble, Maximo. The reason I'm making this particular video doing a review on Shepard's CMMS is because Shepard's product specifically, unlike all the other competitors, is operating in native NetSuite. In other words, it's not a bolt-on integration, it's not a separate platform and login. It operates, as you're about to see, natively in NetSuite, and it takes advantage of all the things that already exist in NetSuite. So this is something I commonly do. If I'm going to review a product, I always try to go with the native option because they're always better and they have so many more capabilities than by going with an external product. So that's the basic concept. And with all of that in mind, let's take a look at Shepard CMMS in the system. All right, so here we are in the Shepard system. You can tell this is a demo account. And before we actually dive in, I just want to make a quick note. You can see right here at the top the example where Shepard has an FSM option, a rental option, preventative maintenance, health, safety, and wellness, etc., etc. So we're on right now the CMMS dashboard. And keep in mind, because this is native NetSuite, we can rely on all these things that already exist in the NetSuite system, like dashboards, safe searches that can be tied into portlets, suite analytics, etc., etc. So we can see, I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but just to give you a flavor of some of the kinds of portlets and information you can have in your dashboard, we have failure percentage by equipment type. We have KPIs specifically for CMMS. If we come down here, we have a saved search regarding particular pieces of equipment that have been tied in here. And lower down, there's actually a particular suite analytics graph that I thought was particularly helpful. So this is reactive orders by equipment type. Now, a reactive order is one that was not planned. There wasn't some kind of maintenance goal that we hit. This is something where it broke down, so we had to go fix it. It's reactive. And this is showing us every different piece of equipment type we have, quarter by quarter, how often did we have to go fix that thing. So in this particular case, I'm highlighting the rotary surface grinders, and you can see by quarter how many times we had to fix it, and you can see that it's getting more and more as the quarters are going by. So this is an insight where you can come in and go, hey, It looks like we're having to fix this thing more often. Is that a problem with our maintenance checklist? Maybe our service technicians aren't properly trained. Maybe we're buying incorrect pieces of machinery. Whatever the problem is, this can give us an insight where we can now go in and try to have the reverse where, let's say if I come down to one where there used to be on forklifts a lot of maintenance that had to be done with them to fix them, and then it's gone down to the fact that we almost never have to fix it reactively. That's the ideal scene. We have this thing as efficient and preventative as possible, so everything is working as it should before the breakdowns occur. And these kinds of insights you can get by utilizing these natively existing NetSuite portlets, reports, etc. So that's a quick look from a dashboard perspective, but now let's actually take a look at how Shepherd operates in the system. And to do that, we're actually going to switch over to a different dashboard, or a different role, I should say, specifically for an administrator. So on here, there's actually two records I want to open up. This is remember I said we were in a construction company, so this is a particular excavator. It's a Caterpillar excavator. You can see a picture of it here. So I'm going to walk through this record, but there's a few things that we should make clear up front. So first off, this is not an existing record in NetSuite. So yes, we are natively operating in the NetSuite system, but unlike other apps that try to take how NetSuite is configured and some of the records that already exist in NetSuite, like project records, and twist them to match whatever that app is trying to accomplish, Shepherd approaches it entirely differently. They said, listen, we don't want you to twist the system into doing something it's not made to do. We're going to bring in and really take advantage of the fact that NetSuite allows you to make custom records. We're going to bring in entirely new custom records that specifically have the functionality that we need. So Shepherd has things, in this particular case, we're looking at a CMMS equipment record, which is this particular Caterpillar. It's not that type of Caterpillar tractor. It is a specific one. It might exist in, let's say, Georgia. That particular one we can keep track of. And we can tie that record into a lot of other things that exist in the NetSuite system, as you're going to see in a second. So with that in mind, let's scroll down through this record. And again, I'm not going to point out every single field. I picked a demo account specifically that had a large amount of fields configured. You could say this is a pretty extensive CMMS configuration to give you a concept of how deep it can go. For many clients, you will not have this many requirements, and you can limit it down to just the things you need. But I want to give you a picture of how robust it can be. So as we scroll down, we've got features like nameplating, the basic NetSuite functionality with location, classification. We can see equipment status fields, installation, when was this thing in-fleeted, in other words, taken off the shelf and actually put into use, and then also ex-fleeted, in other words, retired and no longer in use. We can have all that information. We can see the specific records that generated this asset in the first place. If we're utilizing warranties on this equipment, we have fields for that as well. And like I said earlier, there's also a rental aspect. If you are using Shepherd's rental product, it's all baked into the record, so you can simply access that information right here. And then coming down further, you can see you can also build out an equipment tree. So if there's a hierarchy of equipment, it's not just a tractor, but you have the engine as its own piece of equipment, the boom arm, the bucket, the treads, etc. You can build that parent-child relationship where the maintenance that's done on the parent record can also influence what's happening with the children. Scrolling down here, you can see we also, just in addition to the hundreds of fields we have up above, we've got all these subtabs where we actually influence the configuration of this asset and how it gets maintained. So we have things like the maintenance status, and that's specifically for maintenance. We can also have the equipment statuses, and we can see a timeline of what has this a piece of equipment at various times, what has been its various statuses. Over here, again, if you've got warranty as a configuration, you can utilize that. But then we come here to service configuration, which I consider the most important part of this record, where we're actually setting up how do we maintain it. And what we can see here, in this case, it's pretty simple. There's just 3 types of maintenance. You can make as many types of maintenance as you require. So for an excavator, it's not just we maintain it. You might have every week you do a basic service maintenance checkup. You might have every 3 months, you do an oil change. And then every year, you change out the bucket. Every 3 years, it gets an entirely new engine. You could have 20 different individual maintenance processes that gets done for this one piece of equipment. And for each one of them, you can set a custom trigger. In other words, when do you do that type of maintenance? So for example, this one has 2 trigger types. One is miles. So every 1,000 miles, you do this type of maintenance. And then every 50 hours, you do a different type of maintenance. So you can set as many triggers as you want, and you can kind of set up this matrix where the system knows as we've hit these certain triggers or thresholds, we're going to start executing these various things. And I'm going to show you a little bit later in this video, once we've hit those triggers and maintenance is needed, great, how does that actually get executed? But for now, we're just configuring this thing. One thing I want to point out in relation to this is you can have it be a little bit more general where, let's say you assume that once the excavator is in use, it does 2 miles a day on average. So you could have it play out that way where, good, after a certain amount of use days, we've assumed it's driven 1,000 miles. We do a certain type of maintenance. But you can also utilize the fact that many pieces of large equipment often have internalized tracking devices, or there's an option to buy a tracking device that provides this information. So for this excavator, you might have a little tracker that you hook into kind of like in the actual cab that tells you exactly how many hours it's been on, how many miles it's driven, and that information can then feed into NetSuite real time so that you know exactly when that type of maintenance is needed. And if you start feeding that back into what we already just looked at with the various analytics and reports, you can get incredibly precise in terms of when you're doing preventative maintenance and making sure you're doing it at the exact right time so that things never break down. It's all about making this process as efficient and cost-effective as possible. Moving on from that, so this is service configuration. Let's move on to the service tab, because there's one thing I want to show you in particular. If I change this to a little bit of a later report, this is where we're looking at all the various instances of maintenance that have been done and the reports that get attached as a result of that. So if we scroll over here, we have these service records, service reports, I should say. So let's open up this one. If we come to this, we have basically what looks like a PDF document, and you can configure this however you want. This is the end result, this end report, based on the fact that this service maintenance was done. So we can see when it was done, who did it, what parts he used, what actual actions he executed. You can see the tasks, what needed to be done, what didn't need to be done, how successful was it. We could attach photos to this, signature from the technician, whatever you want to have on this document. Now, in this particular case, this is for CMMS, so this is an internal document just to record the fact of what was done. But if you are utilizing something like Shepherd's FSM document, you can make this as flashy as you want and provide any information you need in here. So it's a document that can go to the customers, showing them what was done and what they're paying for. So these are examples of service reports. We're going to close this and go back to our equipment record. And one last thing in terms of the subtabs, you can see we have fixed asset management. So fixed assets, if you're going to be buying these large pieces of equipment, no doubt you're going to want to go through the depreciation process with them. So FAM is just a standard module in NetSuite from an accounting standpoint. And the fact that we, as Shepherd, people utilizing Shepherd CMMS, are operating in NetSuite, we can take advantage of these things that already exist in NetSuite, like FAM. These records get tied into each other, so they're all operating in a cadence together. Coming up to the top here, so let's say we've got this piece of equipment. Now we've configured it so that we know over certain routine triggers, we're going to do certain types of maintenance, but let's say something unexpected happens. The tread breaks over a particular piece of rough terrain, and now we got to send somebody out there to fix it. I'm going to show you in a second how we would send someone out, but what you can do here is on this piece of equipment record, we can generate that service order right off of this equipment. So instead of clicking this, I actually have one already created, so we can come to it. And listen, I could scroll down here and I could show you how we've got, again, an enormous amount of information and customization that we can do from a servicing standpoint. I mean, I'm literally just scrolling through hundreds and hundreds of fields, but there's really just two things in particular I want to comment on, which is how parts come into play when you're doing the servicing. So in this particular case, the tread is broken, a technician's gone out there. Now he's gonna need a new tread, assuming he can't replace the tread or fix the one that is currently there. So he's either gonna need to take a tread off the shelf of the warehouse, if it exists, in which case he's gonna need to come up here and hit allocate parts. And I'll just kind of briefly show you the app that he would be using as a technician to do the allocation. But you can see right here on the record, we can do an allocation of parts saying, great, we took that tread off the shelf, we put it on the tractor, we're good to go. But assuming maybe there are no treads left, well, great, the technician's gonna need to go in there. He's gonna need to create a purchase order. It'll need to go through the various approval process, and then we'll need to get new treads to that location so he has the ability to actually replace that particular part. So these are all normal records that exist in the NetSuite system, things like purchase orders, inventory transfers, bins, things like that. And because Shepherd CMMS is sitting right there on NetSuite, it's taking advantage of all these things that already exist within the system. We can generate new records, standard records in NetSuite, all part of the package. So that's a concept of how these records get configured and how it exists in the system from a configuration standpoint. But what about when you want to actually start executing on these service orders? How does that work? To do that and to show you, I'm going to come up here to the planner board. So this is where whether it's a servicing manager, you might call it a dispatcher, this is your command center where technicians are going to be sent out to actually start fulfilling what needs to be done on these service orders. So what we can see here is on the left, we've got a long list of all the technicians we have, and we can filter these as needed. Maybe we only want to look at technicians in a particular location. Great, you can do that. And then in the middle here, we're basically looking at a date time period. In this particular case, we're looking at it by week. We could look at it by specific day. We could look at it by month, whatever we need. We have all these filters here at the top. And we can see all the various service orders by technician, by date on the planner board. So if you want to change the configuration of colors, you want different technicians, you can customize this as much as you want. But assuming this is fine, we can come over here to service orders, and we have a list of all the service orders that we need to now place on people's boards. And as we look at this, we can see a lot of these technicians are currently very busy, and we could click on these. We can get all the basic information in terms of what's happening with them. We also have the ability to drag and drop these things. So let's say we go, listen, we really need Jake specifically for this job. We could take this thing and we could switch it over to a different technician. We could also edit it, crunch it down to a shorter timeline if that was needed. But for this particular case, let's see if there's a technician that doesn't have anything on their board. So we're going to come down here and we can see that we've got Roland down here. Well, Roland doesn't have anything. So if I scroll down here, there's actually a particular service order that I know is going to have a problem with him, this one in particular, because it's for an area that Roland is not located in. So if I try to drag and drop this onto Roland's board, it's going to give us a zone mismatch. It says, listen, there's a problem. Now, the rules that govern this can all be configured in the system. You can create whatever rules you want based on skill sets, location, timing, whatever you want. In this particular case, the way this rule works is it's not going to be a hard block. It's just going to say, listen, I don't recommend this. But we may know as the dispatcher that, yeah, Roland's not usually in Georgia, but he happens to be there right now, and it's actually fine. So we could override it and still basically give him that particular job. But in this particular case, let's say, no, we don't want to do that. We want to drag over this other job and we can give it to Roland. It pops up this window with all this information. If you've ever dealt with NetSuite's FSM option and their kind of equivalent of a planner board, it's not the most tactile. This is, now that I've actually had some time to interact with this thing, it's very user-friendly. The buttons are easy to click on. The options are obvious. All of these things can be configured. So in this particular case, as the dispatcher, we can come in and say, these are the parts that are going to be needed. This is what you need to keep in mind. We can add notes. We can say, you have to be there at a certain time. Here's the gate code, whatever we need for this particular service order for this particular technician. All of it is at our fingertips in this case. So that's a concept of how this planner board works. Let's also take a look at the fact that we're currently just looking at the technician planner board, which is a common one to use, but we might want to take advantage of, let's say, the crew planner board. So if your teams are not just one guy, but let's say it's 3 technicians that all go in one van, you can take a look at it from a crew standpoint. Or maybe you really want to look at all the service orders and then get a concept of which technicians you want to allocate in various places. And as I've commented on earlier, Shepherd also has a rental option, so that is its own planner board if you have that requirement. So that's a concept of how the person at the bird's eye view, he's operating things, making sure everything's getting done. That's how the service manager operates. But what about the technicians on the ground? What are they going to be seeing? So if we jump out of this planner board, so we've got our basic records. The technicians themselves, usually these guys are blue collar. They're generally not good with computers. This is one of the big problems that you run into when you are dealing with field service and this kind of thing in general, is you need to make sure you're dealing with a software that your technicians can adopt and they're willing to adopt. Because if you can't pull that off, no matter how great the software is, you're going to have a failed implementation. So the mobile apps and the accessibility of that is incredibly important for any kind of CMMS or field service option. And having now played around with the mobile app, and again, compared to NetSuite's mobile app, which is notoriously bad and unfriendly for people who are not very good with technology, their app, which I'm going to pull up here, I have it off on the side. This gives you a concept of what the app looks like. Obviously, I'm just opening it in a browser, but they would have it open on their phone. And what we're seeing here is, let's say my name is Connor, I'm a technician. I can open up my app. It tells me the date, what I've got on the lineup, reminders of things to keep in mind. It also, Shepherd has a time tracking option. So I can come in here, I can log my hours. I can say how much time I spent on one job, how much I spent on a different service order, etc. And it would get logged to that service order. So you know exactly how much time is being divvied up. So this is what I can deal with. I can come down here, I can see my various working hours, I can log all of that. I can also come up here on the top right and you can see I have a vast array of additional features. Now you can limit this down if you only want your service technicians doing specific things. You can customize this as much as you want. In some cases, if your technicians are handling nuclear power plants, you might want to give them 50 item checklists with 19 photos they need to take, and they need to sign it in blood to be able to sign off on a particular job. Again, it really just depends on the circumstances. What do you want your technicians to do, and what's the experience you want them to have? So from a CMMS standpoint, probably cases is going to be a common one because they're doing cases of maintenance for the internal equipment. If you're dealing with an FSM option, of course, a customer search may come in handy. Or if the technician's looking into the future and going, hey, I know this service order is coming up, they could be taking a look at that. And they might want to come down here and say, hey, I know there's no treads in that warehouse. I want to put a purchase order in right now. So when I get there 2 days from now, it's available at that time. So they've got all these options available to them as required. All right, so that's a quick run through of the software, including the planner board and the mobile app. Now let's talk a little bit more generally about Shepherd CMMS as a product, starting with the pros and cons, and we'll begin with pros. Something I've commented on throughout this video is the fact that Shepherd CMMS is a native application. And I think you get the idea of why that's such a benefit. So I'm not going to beat a dead horse on that one. The next thing I want to comment on is the fact that it is a very robust product. And there's one particular thing I want to say in relation to that, because over the last couple of years, I've heard And specifically in relation to NetSuite's FSM product, I've heard the line running coming from NetSuite that their FSM product is the standard one and it's robust, and that Shepherd's alternative product is not as capable. It doesn't have as many functions. So I've heard this line running, and in the last couple of years, I haven't specifically dealt with Shepherd, so I didn't know any better. But now that I've actually had the time to go in, play around with it, see what it can do, I can tell you unequivocally whether we're dealing with Shepherd's FSM option or their CMMS option, it is far more robust with way more options and customization capabilities than NetSuite natively has, certainly with their FSM module. There's just no comparison. So that is simply not true. That idea that you'd rather go with NetSuite for some of their native products, something like Shepherd FSM or CMMS, you're going to have way more options at your fingertips. And like I alluded to earlier, really anything you could possibly fathom as a company that needs CMMS, you can configure into the system. And of course, by Shepherd having these other products like FSM, rental, health, safety, and wellness, and time tracking, all of these things together actually incorporate what's referred to as an enterprise asset management system, an EAM. So it's something that incorporates all of these different features, and for some companies that is vital. So Shepherd, not only by focusing on CMMS, but by having all of these other products and making them so they are cohesive and they work together, they can provide all kinds of functionality that you simply can't get with NetSuite or really any other option. And that's something I consider arguably one of the most important benefits of going with Shepherd. So that's the pros. Now let's comment on the cons. And first off, and this is really a reverse of the first pro that I brought up, is the fact that it is native NetSuite. So if you don't like the UI in NetSuite, you don't like the way things get customized in the system, or, and this is a common complaint from NetSuite users, you don't like the speed of NetSuite, well, all of those problems are going to come along with Shepherd as well because you are operating natively in the system. So if you don't like the fact that the NetSuite pages can take quite a bit to load when you're initially logging in, if you haven't used it very frequently, those are issues you're going to run into with Shepherd as well because you are limited by the fact that you are in the system. Another big thing that you should keep in mind, and this is a point I always bring up when I do review videos on third-party products, is the fact of the cost. Let's be honest, NetSuite is not a cheap product to begin with, so you're already paying for that and the implementation cost of NetSuite. So paying for third-party applications on top of that can a lot of times be a headache and really hard on your budget. The one thing I would say though is, and while I don't talk about costs specifically, if you are a company that is utilizing or looking for a CMMS product, it's an element that is integral to your business. So unlike some of the other products that I reviewed, like let's say the NetGain products, where they enhance the functionality that NetSuite already has, this is something that NetSuite just cannot do in the first place. So if you do have large pieces of machinery that you own and you need to maintain them, then it's not a question of, do I want to get a CMMS or not? It's not like you can keep track of this stuff on pen and paper. It's just a question of which CMMS am I going to go with? Because the cost really at that point is not even something that you can avoid. You just need that kind of functionality. So you just want to pick the best one that there is. So that's it in terms of the pros and cons. To wrap up this video, there are a few additional, let's say, implementation details I want to make sure that you're aware of. So if you are looking at implementing Shepherd CMMS, generally speaking, the implementation team will try to do the timeline in about 3 months. But that can vary depending on the circumstance. So if you are stable on NetSuite, everything's running fine, and now you want to bring in a CMMS option, you might be able to do it in just 2 months. However, if you are going live with NetSuite and you're right in the middle of that entire process, well, Shepherd's going to run alongside that, and it's probably going to take about as long as the go live in the first place. So it might take 5 months, it might take 6 months, or even longer as your NetSuite go live is kind of going through the hurdles in that process. So you just need to think with that, be in touch with the implementation team to get a gauge of how long they think it would take for your company, including the fact of how much are you going to be customizing your CMMS? Do you need a pretty standard, simple setup, or do you need something that's incredibly deep? And one thing you should keep in mind is when you are doing that implementation, there is on top of the licensing fee for the software, there is an implementation fee similar to when you're implementing NetSuite in the first place. You have to pay for the software and you have to pay for the implementation. So that's it in terms of the implementation. The last thing I want to bring in mind is that if you are looking at getting Shepherd CMMS, you should be aware of the fact that if you get additional products, so not just CMMS, but let's say rental and time tracking, by bundling these products that are all within that EAM suite, you do get discounts. They allow you to bundle these things and get a lower cost overall. So you should keep that in mind if you know you have more extensive requirements. So if you are interested in checking out something like Shepherd, I will include a link for that down below. If you end up going through that link, it does support my channel, so thank you. And of course, if you found this review video helpful, please hit that like button, subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and with all of that in mind, I hope to see you in the next video.